For several years, Randy Orton was not the nicest wrestler in the WWE, nor the most peaceful internally. Before evolving in an admirable way, we can even say that he raised hell behind the scenes, and that it's a miracle that he is still alive. It's a pleasure to meet you on the Wrestling Paradise to tell you the craziest stories about the one who has now become a pro wrestling legend. Are you ready to be shocked to learn how he almost died of an accidental overdose? Are you wondering what kind of problems the Viper caused in restaurants? Do you want to know why Randy had post-traumatic stress disorder after being in the army? Do you want to find out what he did with Dynamite in Mexico one day? Are you curious about why The Undertaker was very upset with him the day before WrestleMania 21? You have come to the right place, because in our video we are going to tell you the most incredible revelations about the Legend Killer, and they will surely shock you. You are on the Wrestling Paradise, the craziest stories about Randy Orton. Let's go. From his debut in the main roster in 2002 until essentially during 2007, Randy Orton had a self-destructive behavior that almost killed him, literally. In those years, he abused pain medications, and according to him, there are many times when he should not have woken up the next morning. He was only a few pills away from death, and one day in 2006, when the show he was participating in wasn't far from his house, he wanted to go home for once and sleep in his own bed. So he took a few pills at home without having eaten, thinking that it would help him sleep. But it didn't work, so he took some again, still without success, and suddenly he lost consciousness. When he woke up, he was in the emergency room. He had accidentally overdosed, and if it weren't for Samantha, his wife at that time, who took him to the hospital, he would have died. The officials of the company heard about his story, and it earned Randy a summons to Vince McMahon's office. The boss then told him he was suspended for 60 days for unprofessional behavior. At that moment, Randy was doing so bad in his life that he started hitting himself, banging his head against the wall because he was so much enraged at himself. As he was about to leave the office, Vince prevented him by saying that he wasn't going to leave the room in this state, that he had to regain control of himself. Unfortunately, this is what the Legend Killer will manage to do, and his evolution is to his credit. If Randy Orton had a problem with painkillers, it's because he had several injuries very early in his career. By having the doctors in his pocket, he was able to have prescriptions with 120 Percocet, 120 Vicodin, and 120 Samas. And it was really during the weekend of WrestleMania 21 in 2005 that Randy Orton reached a milestone in the problem he had with these pills, and that he seems to have hit rock bottom. He was going to have the most important match of his career against The Undertaker, and there was also the Hall of Fame the day before WrestleMania, where he was going to induct his father, Bob Orton Jr. But on Friday night, Randy decided to go celebrate all night with some friends. He was so devastated that on Saturday morning he didn't hear his alarm clock. And above all, he missed the rehearsal of his match against The Undertaker, which was scheduled for Saturday morning. That morning, he let down several people, including the dead man who felt disrespected. Fortunately for Randy, the Phenom let this story slide because it was already scary enough to face The Undertaker at WrestleMania for his first singles match at the grandest stage of them all. And at this rehearsal, there was also the legend Ricky Steamboat, the referee Mike Chioda, the official John Laurinaitis, and even Randy's father. And when the Legend Killer was supposed to do the introductory speech for his dad in the evening at the Hall of Fame, that's when he really hit rock bottom. That night, he came to induct his father, which was therefore one of the most important moments of his life in front of his grandfather's eyes in addition, and he didn't have a single note. He hadn't written anything at all, and he did his speech in just 1 minute and 30 seconds by improvising. And that's not all. During his father's speech, he was sitting and completely out, probably full of drugs. His father deserved much better, and this is one of the moments that Randy is most ashamed of since, as he said. Personally, that was probably one of my biggest fails, not giving my father his proper due, what he deserved that night. That's definitely my biggest regret. Do you want more crazy stories about Randy Orton, including how he blew up a hotel in Mexico or other crazy stuff? Don't worry, it's coming by the end of the video, hang in there. Randy Orton and the restaurants. It's a long story. The adult movie star of wrestling, Val Venus, told that one day, with Randy Orton and colleagues, they were all sitting around a table in a steakhouse and they were served steaks. The steak that was brought to Randy seemed to be good, but he grabbed it with 2 fingers and said to the waitress, "What is this?" Then he threw the steak at her and ordered her to go get him another one. Still in a restaurant with Cody Rhodes by his side at the time of the Legacy Clan, Orton lost his temper because he didn't like the oatmeal he was served. He then threw the container with the oatmeal in the restaurant, got up and then left. On another occasion, he had even forced a girl who came to ask him for an autograph to smash a plate of mushrooms on her head if she wanted this privilege. Definitely, at that time, it was better not to stumble upon the legend killer in a restaurant. In the period when his backstage behavior was known to be awful, Randy Orton also annoyed a diva one day, and you'll see that the reason is really stupid. In this case, it is Amy Weber. Once a doctor had told Amy to go take ibuprofen in the men's locker room for the injuries she had, so she did. What she certainly didn't suspect was that a certain Randy Orton didn't appreciate a woman coming to use herself in the men's locker room. So at a moment when she was sleeping on a plane, Randy Orton threw himself with all his power against the back of her seat, which caused the poor woman to fall on the floor. Even if he didn't do more than that, it was still very brutal and mean. Obviously, she woke up without really understanding what was happening to her. Orton insulted her by telling her that will teach her a lesson, and she went back to sleep. Though we can imagine that this incident contributed to Amy Weber not even staying a year in the Stamford Federation. In his first months in the company, Randy Orton experienced two events that triggered his infernal period in a way. The first one is a shoulder injury, which represents in a way the beginning of physical suffering for him. And then came the temptation to take painkillers to calm it all down, which will eventually make him addicted. But while this injury could have ruined everything, in reality not at all. After having already been able to show his tremendous talent in the ring, this injury enabled him to have a weekly segment, the Randy News Network. He was giving updates on his injury, becoming more and more arrogant, and proving his talent on the microphone as well. All this caught the eye of Triple H and Ric Flair, already two legends of the business at that time, and so it led to a second milestone event. They decided to form the iconic Evolution clan with Randy and also Batista, a way to train the new generation of stars to take over. And experiencing this success at a very young age, by becoming the youngest world champion at SummerSlam in 2004, got to the legend killer's head with the consequences that we know. When Randy finished high school, he had another experience that seems to have traumatized him, the one he had in the US Army. Initially, he signed because a recruiter promised him that he would have all the girls he wanted, enough money to buy a nice car, and that was enough to convince Randy to sign a multi-year contract with the government. But the reality will be much different. Even though Orton was good at training and liked being part of a team, he quickly realized that he was in a toxic environment with a lot of bullying. For example, he saw a hazing where his friends' clothes were taken off and where they were forced to stay in position to do push-ups, otherwise they were burned with a lamp. He also saw another young person being tied up and put in a sleeping bag while he was on the phone with his mother, which caused this young person to have a panic attack. Seeing these scenes even gave Randy post-traumatic stress disorder, and he quickly realized that he had nothing to do there, knowing that he was already been dealing with bullies all his youth. But the problem at that time was that he had committed for 4 years, and he couldn't stop like that. In the end, after running away, then returning after 2.5 months to surrender, then 38 days in military prison, which was a very difficult experience, he was able to come home in peace, and fortunately he would end up becoming one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. And finally, a story about Dynamite. Already you should know that the comedic character that many fans love, Santino Marella, says about Randy that he liked to have a good time, but that he always took it too far. And this was true one fine day in Mexico. This time we don't know why, but the Viper had an obsession. He was determined to find Dynamite. So a few hours later, when Santino was sleeping in his hotel room at 3 a.m. and he heard an explosion that shook the entire building, he immediately understood what happened. Randy Orton had found Dynamite. And that was it for these craziest stories about Randy Orton. With all these stories, we realized that the legend killer really had a period in his career when he seemed to have a destructive behavior, both towards others and towards himself. And this is something that makes us appreciate even more his incredible evolution as a human being, since he is now a family man who seems fulfilled and totally transformed, and a business veteran who is today recognized as one of the greatest. And if we take a step back on the Viper, if we become sufficiently aware of his mind-blowing evolution, if we realize that he started in 2002, and that he is the only one of his generation to have never left the company, if we remember his rivalries that have become classics against John Cena or Triple H, his beautiful talent in the ring where everything seems natural, we can still tell ourselves that the legend killer is really one of the best, for sure. And that's my debate for you. Do you think Randy Orton is the greatest of all time from an in-ring look and character perspective? Come and give your opinion. It will be exciting to exchange our points of view in the comments. We can say that Randy Orton was really unique. I hope you had a good time watching this video, and I invite you to stay on the Paradise of Wrestling to look at some other ones. See you right away.
And that's the bottom line, 'cause Stone Cold said so. What?